Hello, old friend. God, I understand why Magneto loves saying that. So in case you haven't been keeping up with modern events, first off, good, your mental health is more important. But if you'd like to pivot to something less terrifying, why not look over at comic book movies? You know, the thing I use to shelter myself from the rest of the world.
I like it in here.
Because believe it or not, within the span of the last couple of weeks, it does feel like that the internet has done what it does best and shifted the narrative from being, God, these things are so cooked, to we're so back. I can't wait for this hype train to get derailed come Doomsday, and we're back in the pits of misery until something else pulls us out. But now we're getting announcements for what might be that very thing, and it comes in the form of none other than Marvel's first premier superhero team, or second, or I guess third, because the Invaders technically count. The one with the big old X in the title. That's right, the X-Men. And now it looks like they're finally getting folded into this greater ongoing pantheon in quite a unique way. Because as we've been seeing, not only the X-Men getting properly recast with a brand spanking new set of actors, but Marvel seems to also be going back to the nostalgia well and plundering the remains of that old Fox universe at the same time. And this is creating a little bit of a messy situation that I wanted to sort through and understand what the plan here is. So that's what we're going to do today. What is the direction that the X-Men are going to be taking in the MCU moving forward? How are they balancing the stuff of old with what's to come? And how excited should we even be for the return of Xavier and his gifted youngsters? So suit up in those comic book accurate costumes, because I highly doubt that we're going to be sticking with the black leather getup. It's sadly not the early 2000s anymore.
What a shame.
And let's discuss. Pretty good time to be an X-Men fan. I mean, it's not exactly the peak that it once was back in the mid-90s and early 2000s, but it's pretty darn close, especially considering the fact that all that stuff that made them popular back in the day has made its big return into the public zeitgeist. With the X-Men completely dominating across media and things like X-Men 97 on Disney+, the influx of X-Men related characters filling up the cast of Marvel rivals, and now their big screen return in Avengers Doomsday and potentially Secret Wars. There's also all these new casting announcements, as well as some other things that we'll get to in a little bit. But while I get to that, why don't you get to liking, commenting, and subscribing to this channel so I don't have to spend any more time wondering where I'm going to put this shameless plug. But yeah, the X-Men are back to taking over the world, and it really does feel like that the sky is the limit as to what can now be achieved. And honestly, it's been a long time coming, with the rocky road that was the X-Men's big return to Marvel proper, requiring a giant studio merger, the likes of which I fear are about to be rivaled over across the street with their competitor, and the incredible amount of downplaying that they received until being subjected to a massive resurgence. It's about time that we started to see some more X-Men stories appear on both the big and small screen. And Marvel's approach of reintegrating their merry mutants has been an interesting one to say the least.
What he said.
Considering the fact that for the longest time, it did feel like that what Marvel was doing was hedging its bets on whether or not to recast these guys outright, or try to reintegrate all the stuff from those Fox X-Men movies into their much more comic book inspired universe. With characters like Quicksilver, Professor Xavier, and even Wolverine and Deadpool all finding their way into a Disney Marvel property, it did really feel like that what was going on with Marvel was that instead of trying to introduce the X-Men into the MCU, same way they did Spider-Man, by essentially telling audiences not to worry about what came before and instead focus on the new stuff to come, Disney instead relied heavily on the nostalgia that people felt for those original X-Men features, and kept trying to cherry pick pieces that they could use in their current stories, oftentimes involving things like multiverses or bait and switch style plot twists.
Boner?
Boner.
And never fully committing to saying that all those stories actually existed on this 616 or 999 reality that we've been following since the first Iron Man. And for a while, the theories were that mutants simply did not exist in the MCU at all, and that the way the X-Men were going to make their return after this major studio not having the rights for so long was that they were going to utilize the Secret Wars inspired story and take both of their worlds, merging them onto one planet. Similar to what happened with the Arrowverse with Supergirl and The Flash, seeing them originally exist on two counter Earths, and then after a crisis event, they were both placed on the same planet. And with the announcements for what's to come in Doomsday, it did seem like that this was indeed the plan. Marvel, after all, is relying heavily on the cast of this thing to sell the movie, showing off all those familiar faces that were going to make their big return, some of which are going to be easier to spot than others because they won't be under a massive amount of blue face paint. And to be honest, this did make the most sense, as after all, Marvel's approach with the X-Men up until this point has been not to do anything new with this group of characters, and instead simply recycle stuff from the old days and try to inject them with fresh new life. The most obvious example of this is how they handled the return of the 90s cast in X-Men 97, greenlighting this continuation of those original tales, even going so far as to bring back every remaining cast member who they still had access to. Doing all this instead of creating a brand new take, because after all, once you did create something new, it was expected that you'd have to follow through with it, and the last thing Marvel likes to do is make any permanent decisions, liking to save having to commit to anything until the very final seconds. And I'm sure their visual effects team loves that.
The visual effects team has moved on to another project.
But yeah, Disney just seemed to want to take a bunch of safe bets when it came to working with the X-Men characters, instead of trying to create something new, utilizing the nostalgia of the old, and kicking the can down the road from the inevitable reboot, which was just going to have to come one way or another. Because after all, maybe 10 years ago it was possible to do some more with the X-Men cast from those Fox movies. A lot of these guys are starting to lean a bit more towards the older side, and despite some of them like James Marsden not having aged a day,
You haven't aged a day.
it was never going to be possible to continue this forever. And yes, while they did have the rebooted Apocalypse timeline, those movies never caught on with fans the same way the original ones did, and therefore tying yourself to that brand was never really going to be a good idea. And so at some point, they were going to have to pull the trigger on putting their own spin on this beloved team. And now we're finally getting confirmation that this is indeed the plan, with this slew of casting announcements building out our roster. And this is where we're going to get a little bit of spoiler territory for some of the most recent projects that have come out, so if you haven't been keeping up with all of Marvel's output, then I'd recommend steering clear of this section, or if you just don't care, well, get ready because I'm going to be spoiling some stuff. But yeah, in addition to getting some faces to finally fill the shoes of these big names, like Samara Weaving as Emma Frost, Kit Connors as Scott Summers, also known as Cyclops, Maya Boyd as Aurora Monroe Storm, Indy Navarrete as Anna Marie Rogue, and Christopher Abbott as the head of the school himself, Professor Xavier. Additionally, we also have Sadie Sink as our new Jean Grey, being the first of this crew to make their big screen debut in Spider-Man Brand New Day. We also have a villain set up to take on Xavier's first class, and it is confirmed that none other than Girl Star himself, Adam Driver, is going to be tormenting our merry mutants as the Mr. Sinister. And this casting tells us a lot of what this story is going to be about, just based on simple things like the age of the entire crew. You'll notice that this cast is leaning quite young, with the majority of them being in their early to mid 20s. Hell, even Xavier himself isn't all that much more their senior, with Christopher Abbott only just having turned 40. So Marvel's setting themselves up to get the most bang for their buck by getting these brand new talents into the fold as early as possible in their career. By casting a bunch of 20-something-year-olds, it does mean that for the next couple of decades, Marvel can basically guarantee that they're going to be able to stick in the roles and doesn't have to worry about them possibly getting too old to take on the more physically demanding tasks. It's also notably cheaper to hire an up-and-comer over a seasoned veteran. Very convenient.
Now get out of here.
So yeah, by getting them in so young, it does seem to spell that they're going to be passing on the torch of doing the heavy lifting for keeping this franchise relevant over the coming years. Which to me is a smart business decision. However, it does definitely limit the kind of stories that can be told, since based on the age of this crew, I imagine it means that the characters in the movie are going to be of a similar age, if not a bit younger. From what we can tell, Jean Grey was somewhere between the ages of 16 and 22, though I'm inclined to believe that she leaned more towards the younger side, and if she's a benchmark for the rest of her co-stars, I imagine the other X-Men in Xavier's first class are going to be around as old as her. So I wouldn't be surprised if this movie functioned as an origin for how the X-Men were created, or at least took place extremely early on in the team's career. Similar to what Spider-Man did in Civil War, where essentially the only things that have happened to Peter up to this point are getting bit by that radioactive arachnid, developing powers, and potentially losing his Uncle Ben, though it's still up in the air whether or not he ever existed to begin with. And this approach would make a lot of sense, especially with the fact that up to this point, there hasn't been a single mention of a mutant outside of 1 or 2 edge cases.
There's something different in your genes, like a mutation.
So it doesn't seem to be something that the general public is aware of and has an opinion of going into this movie. In fact, for the most part, people are pretty positive on anyone with superpowers and seem to be willing to hail them as incoming heroes, regardless of how shady their past was. I mean, look at someone like Bucky Barnes, the former Winter Soldier, and see how his dark and twisted history hasn't done much to squash his ambitions to be elected to higher office. Like, didn't this guy murk JFK? Oh, well, I guess that balances things out then. So it does mean that a lot of groundwork is going to need to be done in order to not just assemble the X-Men, but position them as the underdogs, fighting against an increasingly hostile governing entity. So I wouldn't be surprised the first movie we see would be following the aftermath of Brand New Day, where after what Jean did to the citizens of New York, people are becoming a bit more trepidatious as to these people with abilities just sort of popping up. And maybe there is going to be this divide between people who did get powers but later in life due to science, magic, or some other outside forces, and these individuals who just so happen to be born that way. And based on everything we've seen thus far, I do think that they have all the resources to execute on this vision with this cast and crew. Like, Samara Weaving is straight up the spitting image of Emma Frost from the comics, and has demonstrated an ability to play both sophisticated and intelligent, while also having that sass and grit that's key to this character. Meanwhile, Kit Connors definitely also looks the part, and has been part of many projects, though nothing in particular I think screams Cyclops. I wouldn't be surprised if he was able to pull a hat trick and capture that confident leadership demonstrated by Xavier's star pupil. And plus, if he's able to nail it in that Elden Ring movie, then I'll have faith that there's nothing he can't achieve. Maya Boyd is also someone I don't know much about, but that's not just because of bad research on my part, but more so due to the fact that there's just not much to her IMDb page. So this will easily be the biggest project she's been attached to, playing the weather goddess known as Storm. Someone I am pretty familiar with is Indy Navarrete as Rogue, who I'm sure plenty of you were introduced to in her breakout role in Obsession. And yes, this is easily where she's given her best performance yet. However, I'll always know her as Sarah Cushing from Superman and Lois, a show she was a part of for its entire 4-season duration, and offered her a chance to work in this larger-than-life superhero world. Some are a little bit concerned that she doesn't look like the spitting image of Rogue, but to that I say, which version? These characters are drawn by dozens of different people, and you'll be lucky if they'll look consistent from page to page. So if you're just complaining she's not the 6'7" Amazonian from Marvel Rivals, then listen, I get it, that would have been cool. But Indy Navarrete is an incredible actress, and I have full confidence that she's gonna knock this role out of the park. And obviously we've seen Sadie Sink as recently as the Spider-Man movie, and while they are taking a different take on Jean, making her a lot more roguish and distrusting of others, I do think she's nailing what they're going for, and have no concerns with her as a performer, and simply hope that they can just utilize her better than what was done with the previous incarnations of this character. The real wildcard to me is Christopher Abbott as Professor Xavier, who is definitely not the guy I was eyeing to put in the role. I was more looking in the direction of Ralph Fiennes myself, but I'm sure Abbott's got what it takes as well. I don't know much about him as a performer, so once again we're just gonna have to wait and see what exactly he can bring to this character, as well as what he's ultimately gonna look like once they shave his head and put him in the wheelchair. Yeah, he's going from being the hairiest guy around in the Wolfman to the baldest guy in the MCU. Talk about range. But what would a superhero movie be without a villain? Like a Spider-Man Brand New Day. But don't worry about that, because of course Adam Driver is here to fill that role. And this too makes a lot of sense. Marvel's been trying to get Adam Driver into their universe for the last 10 plus years, and have reportedly been constantly offering him different roles, from like Mr. Fantastic to Doctor Doom, which honestly probably would have been better than what they're gonna do, but wait and see. And even another X-Men villain, that being Magneto. There are also rumors about him either being Sebastian Shaw or Exodus, but you know, Sinister is also a character he'd be very well suited for. Being this old-timey Victorian scientist who, through his experimentations on genetics, has mutated himself to the point of being unrecognizable. Now he's like this genetic pale-skinned vampire-looking guy, getting up to an all manner of no-good experiments, namely trying to combine the genes of Scott Summers and Jean Grey to create the ultimate life form. Which, I mean, hey, all those characters are in this thing, so wouldn't be surprised if that's something he's getting up to. I am curious how long he'll be sticking around for, since Marvel does often cast some big-name actor to play their villain, only to kill him off in the final act, mostly because these more famous actors are more hesitant to sign a multi-picture deal, especially with a universe as long-running as this. And after his work on the Star Wars series, I can imagine Driver would be a bit cautious when approaching another big-name Disney franchise. Hopefully they'll treat him better than the last time around. But I do hope he plans to stick around for a bit, since Sinister is kind of like this cockroach of the X-Men corner of the universe, always popping up during the big events, and finding a way to make a bad situation even worse through his awful machinations. And the director they have poised to run the show is of course Thunderbolt's very own Jake Schreier, and if you know anything about me, then you'll remember that I'm a big time fan of this guy's previous work, and hail that Thunderbolts movie as one of the best in the series since Guardians 3. So I'm definitely interested to see what he can do with this corner of the universe, and if he can lend the same level of care and depth as he did to those rejects turned new Avengers. And the movie is set to come out in 2028, which is after Doomsday and Secret Wars, meaning that it's going to be in whatever fresh new landscape those movies establish for us. And if rumors are to be believed, then what is going to happen is something of a soft reboot, getting rid of a few elements of the old MCU and swapping them in with a few new ones, all in an effort to try to make it a bit more cohesive and reflective of the comics that inspired them. So we'll see how that all plays out, and is able to act as the exact thing that Marvel needs to reignite interest in their upcoming slate of movies. So yeah, right now the X-Men are in a very dynamic place. With the final remnants of those 2000s movies being milked for the last bits of nostalgia they have to offer, it seems that after Doomsday and Secret Wars, there's nothing left to stop the studio from venturing into this bold new direction with what was once Marvel's most popular superhero team. And as we know, it's been a rocky road to get to this point, so I'm hoping that all the good news that we've been hearing is evidence that the creators behind this all have a vision for what they want to create, and all the resources they need to execute on it. I'll of course at some point start talking about my theories and what I hope this movie can achieve, but as it stands right now, what we do know is that the X-Men are back, and now they're fighting to make their way to be on top of the world. I also heard a rumor that we're going to be getting Sabrina Carpenter in this thing, which I think is just absolutely tremendous, because now, after all these years, we can finally have a height-accurate Wolverine. Balls in your court, Marvel. Make me proud. Hey, thanks for watching. If you stuck all the way to the end, why not check out another one of our videos on screen now? And if you'd like to chat with us directly, come join our Discord. Link in the description below.